All right, welcome back. Episode 18, Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. Quickly recapping last week, we only hit 3 out of our 5 tips, but actually ended up with a belt, top 10% in verdict, largely due to the collect we got with Kevin Holland round 1 submission. Did get pretty lucky there. Charlie Ontiveros kind of verbally tapped following a neck injury. Of course, that wasn't a fight I broke down. I broke down the Holland Muradov fight, but he got withdrawn 4 days before. My best call of the night was probably Greg Hardy via knockout. Although the price was short on verdict and short at the bookies, I was super confident that Green just wasn't going to have anything for him in there, and I'd like to say I was pretty right about that. Wasn't a complete whitewash, but a fairly convincing victory. As for my worst call of the night, it's either between Andre Feely or Bobby Green. Tough one, really. Neither a really bad call. Green probably unlucky on the scorecards though. I did have it 29-28 his way. So I'll say that Feely was my worst call. His defensive wrestling did look good. He impressed me with his reversals and stand-ups, but my word, Mitchell's so tenacious with those takedowns and has such a smothering presence on top. It was a great fight to watch. I was hoping for a more chaotic third round and would have liked to have seen Bryce try and mount some more offense in a few of those positions he managed to get to, but all in all, very smart fight for him. No doubting anymore that he belongs in the top 15 at 145, and I'm excited to see who they slot him up against next. Going to the bottom of this card now, a 5-fight main card. At the bottom, we've got Claudia Gadelha versus Iain or Xiaonan. Gadelha's 1.49 times on verdict and $2.23 at the bookies, so a bit of a misrepresentation there. And Iain is 3.03 times at the bookies on verdict and $1.63 at the bookies. And like I just highlighted, to give this fight some perspective, if the bookies would give me the same odds on Xiaonan as verdict are, I'd be smashing it all day. I think this is a very, very good fight for her, like a massive test, but stylistically favourable. Gadelha is still a very good fighter, kind of a staple of the 115-pound division, but you could definitely argue that we've not been seeing the best out of her in her more recent performances. Last time out, winning pretty close, controversial-ish, split to Angela Hill, who, is in form right now, but has never previously been considered on the same level as Claudia and the likes of her at strawweight. Gadelha, her grappling, still great. She's always has it to fall back on, but her striking is the area that's taken the biggest regression for mine. Gadelha's actually been outlanded by all of her opponents except for one in her last 6 fights. The only fighter that she managed to outland in that stretch was Randa Marcos, who is a grappler in her own right anyway. And, Claudia, she's shown that she struggles with a fast pace. It's always been her Achilles heel of sorts. You look at her 4 UFC losses, Jędrzejczyk twice, Andrade and Ansarov, all kind of pressure fighters with high volume, solid conditioning, and decent durability. Those 3 things, Xiaonan is all of those. From her 5 UFC fights to date, which have all been unanimous decision victories just quietly, she's landed 96, 71, 150, 94 and then 93 significant strikes, all in 3-round fights. They're Gaethje-like numbers, seriously high volume. What she also does really well is kind of mix her striking up to the legs and the body. She typically splits about 35 to 40% of her strikes to the lower half and 60% upstairs. And her kicking game's actually solid. The high roundhouse kick, side kick in her arsenal, really slick with the hands as well, great hand speed, actually possesses good power. Like I already mentioned, no finishes in the UFC yet, but 7 knockouts on the regional scene before getting signed, and I can definitely see why. Her head movement defense could be improved a little bit, but her footwork's serviceable, and she does a great job bobbing in and out of range, throwing all her strikes in combinations to kind of counteract that. And as for her style, relentless pressure. Of course, she does pour out that lone jab here and there, but when she commits to the pocket, she'll rip the body, hook upstairs, go for 5+ strikes combinations, 5 or more strikes in a combination before circling out, and then also has a good countering game on the back foot. Of course, Gadelha's going to have the wrestling advantage. I must acknowledge that. She secures takedowns at 45%, which is really, really good. Typically lands at least 1 in every fight. But once down there, she never really searches for a finish. She's not too dangerous, and she's never really been a finisher. Only one stoppage in the UFC when she submitted Kawakewicz in 2017. And as for the wrestling, Xiaonan's shown me solid takedown defense as well. She did get taken down twice in her debut, but has improved largely since then. Only been taken down once since, which was by Angela Hill, another good wrestler. And on that occasion against Hill, Iain was super threatening off her back with a nasty guards. She searched for an arm herself. There's of course the potential for Gadelha to get this to the mat, pass Iain's attacks like you may expect from a veteran and look for a submission herself. But with her lack of submission history or even finishes for that matter in the last 6 to 7 years, I'm struggling to convince myself on that being a valid outcome. So that speaks to my prediction. I've kind of big talked Iain here, and I'll be putting my money where my mouth is. I think this is a close fight, a true test for her, but at these verdict odds, you really can't go wrong. I think she's going to give Claudia big problems on the feet with the speed, power, pressure. Look to counter her when she shoots the takedowns off the cage, and obviously try and keep this standing. I do expect Gadelha to get a takedown at some point, but I think Iain will threaten with something or just be good enough to get back up. And who knows, she showed offensive wrestling ability with 5 takedowns from 6 attempts on Kawakewicz in her last fight. So she could come out and try and beat Claudia at her own game. Unlikely, but of course a possibility. So yeah, Xiaonan, Iain, and via decision at 3.7 times for mine. Claudia's durable, never been finished herself, and although I would like to see Iain's power translate into a knockout in the UFC soon, I don't think it'll be this one. Alright, going along to the next fight, we've got Iain Heinisch versus Brendan Allen. Iain Heinisch 1.67 times and $1.90. Brendan Allen 2.48 times on verdict and $1.90 as well. Going to be a super fun fight, very, very evenly matched. It was scheduled to take place a few months ago, but Iain Heinisch had to withdraw there due to injury. In replacement, Brendan Allen faced Chris Daukaus. Very entertaining back and forth fight. Had to overcome a fair bit of adversity in that one. Daukaus took his back a few times, and Allen got hurt bad at some points. He actually fractured his nose, fractured his orbital, but ultimately lent on his wrestling game there to kind of wrap up the first 2 rounds. He did lose the third, but yeah, scored a decision victory. I think he's going to grow plenty from that fight, develop further. His first time getting a full 15-minute fight under his belt in the UFC. Also getting some of his weaknesses exposed in order to work on them. All of that can only be a good thing for his career trajectory, in my opinion. As to his skill set, for those that don't know, kind of a really strong and dangerous grappler, pretty tricky with his maneuvers on the deck as well, and then also sound defensively with positioning, regaining guard, or reversing, and then very strong and heavy with his offensive top control. Actually pretty dangerous on the feet as well, carries big power in his hands, and isn't shy to throw a variety of techniques. He caught Daukaus in that last fight with a couple of huge knees from the clinch, and also goes upstairs with that step-off high kick, that kind of Robert Whittaker high kick. He does tend to get hit a lot though. His defense not great. His footwork's a little laboured, and head movement not quite swift enough to avoid that lead jab power straight from his opponent. And we saw that in his Dana White Contender Series fight and his UFC debut, being outstruck in both of those fights before getting it to the mat and managing to notch submissions. But like I said, he's gonna evolve. I do think that we see this weekend his stand-up has improved. That Daukaus fight gave him plenty to work on in the striking department, but I can't help but feel that Harnish is going to have a striking advantage. He's a small guy at his height and reach, no stranger to being the smaller guy at 185. I can't see that being a massive problem for him against Brendan Allen, who's going to be the more imposing figure. For Iain Heinisch on the feet, he likes to stay on edge of range for the most part, stay pretty light on his feet and then dart in with quick combinations. I would like him to stay in the pocket a little bit longer, try to land a little more on his entries, but his UFC opponents to date have mainly been grapplers, so I kind of understand there that he doesn't want to give a massive opportunity for level changes when he goes hip to hip. One thing that I do like about Iain is that even against grapplers, he still uses a variety of strikes like the leg kicks, teeps, knees, that a lot of other fighters you see refrain from using against similar opponents due to the fear of the takedown, which often nullifies their own offense. Iain won't do that. He's very workmanlike, very disciplined in the way he goes about it. And he might not be afraid to throw those techniques because he's actually quite a credentialed grappler himself, a 2-time state champion in wrestling in Colorado. Very strong guy in the clinch and on the ground, and does everything right with his takedown defense. He can be a little unorthodox at times. We've seen him somersault rolling to try and break his opponent's grip, try and avoid the takedown, but I do just love to see that work, always trying to avoid getting controlled. And then his jiu-jitsu defense is also high level, He avoided the submissions from Antonio Carlos Jr. in just his second UFC fight, who's an incredibly dangerous BJJ practitioner, who's actually monstrous for middleweight. You know, Brendan Allen's a big guy, and Carlos Jr. would baby him. And it wasn't like Heinisch wasn't put in bad positions in that fight. Carlos had his back a few times, but, you know, Iain just would not be denied, was escaping those positions to then get back up, pour pressure back on in the stand-up. He even secured his own takedown in that fight, showing me he's not afraid to implement his own wrestling offense against these BJJ guys. Harnish is 2-2 in his last 4 fights, but when you look at all of those opponents, they've been in that top 15 to top 20 range. You know, he won that fight to Carlos Jr., then he lost a decision to Brunson, then a really close decision to Akhmedov, before coming out in June and knocking out Gerald Mershaw in the first round. And, you know, I was talking previously about how much Brendan Allen would have grown between his last fight and now, due to that kind of exposure to UFC, exposure to 15-minute fight in the UFC. Well, that's, you know, experience and growth that Iain Heinisch has already had. This is going to be his 6th fight in 2 years within the UFC. Spent quality minutes in the cage already with much higher level guys than Brendan has. Had those areas of his game identified that needed improving and has then gone out and improved them. So to my prediction, I'm taking Iain Heinisch here. No surprise with how I kind of led up to that. I think he's simply the more progressed, more well-rounded fighter. I do think that Brendan has moments, and the first round should be fireworks. I see both guys landing some big shots, including Brendan, perhaps Allen landing a takedown, getting some control time, but ultimately, you know, Heinisch is super sound defensively, will always work to get back up, will have the striking advantage, in my opinion, which I see him exploiting as he gets stronger throughout the fight. Allen's conditioning didn't quite seem to be at the same level in his last fight. He lost that 3rd round quite comprehensively. So yeah, as for my method, I'm going to be taking Heinisch via points here. Allen does seem to be a durable guy. He was hurt in that last fight and didn't quit, and Heinisch does have a style that suits points. So yeah, 2.73 times for the Heinisch decision. Pretty short on verdict, but $1.90 at the moment at the bookies, which is a very intriguing price, and I might be having a dip at that later. Next fight along, we've got Ronny Barcelos versus Khalid Taha. Barcelos is 1.38 times on verdict and $1.25 at the bookies. Taha's coming back at 3.67 times on verdict and $3.85 at the bookies. Barcelos is a 15-1 product out of Rio, coming up against a 13-2 Khalid Taha with 1 no contest on his record. Barcelos, man, not many people know about him, but he gives me like the current version of what we see of Jose Aldo, those kind of vibes, like a 2020 Jose Aldo vibe. He probably kicks a little more than what Aldo does nowadays, and he's perhaps slightly more aggressive. Aldo's kind of gone back into his shell of sorts. But the way he turns into his leg kicks, utilizes the body shot to open up upstairs, shows plenty of similarities, and also the way that he closes distance, ducks under, steps through, and opens up with these wild-looking hooks. Very Aldo-esque. As for his striking, he's obviously really, really good if I'm likening him at all to Jose. You know, he comes from a variety of angles, throws combinations between his hands and legs pretty seamlessly, and, you know, carries solid power for these bantamweights. 8 of his 15 wins via knockout. He also boasts fast hand speed, which, you know, helps him to assert his jab in fights as he's circling around on the edge of distance and open up that 1-2 down the line from his orthodox stance. And then his ground game, you know, he's seriously dangerous on the floor, but also has the ability to get it there. His wrestling and takedowns are very impressive, both out in the open and up against the cage. You know, 58% takedown accuracy is extremely good. He has managed to take down 3 of his 4 opponents in the UFC. The outlier being Carlos Harchin fight. He attempted to take down that one, semi-attempted, but he never really committed to the shot. He grabbed the leg, let it go. Stats makers credited him an attempt. But yeah, when he wants to get this to the ground, when he wants to get a fight to the ground, he has a high chance of doing so. And, you know, really, really good BJJ practitioner. I actually can't believe that he only has 2 wins as a pro via submission. He's been a black belt since he was 20 years old. So smooth on the ground, so dominant with his top pressure and control, getting dominant positions and then working for a submission. Insanely good at keeping his opponent grounded. And, you know, he really transitions from sub-attempt to ground and pound to sub-attempt really, really smoothly. So relentless and so dangerous on the ground. As for Khalid Taha, absolute powerhouse on the feet, especially for 135. He's also shown some ability on the mat, 3 wins via submission in his career. But he's definitely more confident, more at home on the feet with his striking. He has a really dangerous right hand from the orthodox stance as well, which and yeah, also works well in the clinch. Does mix up his strikes a little bit to the body and the legs, although he predominantly hunts the head with his shots because he is so powerful. More of a counter striker than a pace setter, and it's definitely where he's going to offer the most danger in this fight. You know, he's more than capable of timing Barcelos whilst getting pressured toward the cage or on a takedown attempt. And if he does, it could well be lights out. Taha does carry that kind of power. Plus, Ronny can get kind of reckless when he enters the pocket, can come in with his chin up. Again, likening him to Aldo with the McGregor knockout. Very kind of similar, shows some similarities between that and his own style. But in my opinion, that's Taha's win condition, essentially, like a knockout. I think Barcelos has far more routes to victory, far busier on the feet. And although Taha is going to have the power advantage, Ronny is the much more dynamic striker, throws the more versatile strikes. He also has the conditioning to pour pressure on and keep that volume high through a full 15 minutes. Whereas I have got the feeling that Khalid might wilt towards the end of a contest like that. And then the big advantage in this one is the ground ability. People like to drum up Taha as this amazing wrestler, but his offense is non-existent. He hasn't attempted a takedown in the UFC, and his defense, only sits at 63%. Not terrible, but not elite by any means. Both of his UFC opponents have landed multiple takedowns against him. The one opponent that hasn't was Boston Salmon, who he knocked out in under 30 seconds. So, I think Ronny's going to get this to the mat at some point, and when he does, I see Taha seriously struggling to stand back up. Barcelos is that good at keeping his man down. And even if he does manage to get back to the feet, Barcelos is going to know that avenue is open. It just means Taha has so much more to think about. I do think that there's a big chance of Barcelos finishing this one on the ground. Like I said, only 2 wins via sub as a pro, but that's so misrepresentative of his ability. I also like the decision play, but 2.18 times is no value, so I'm going to play the value. Chase some odds in this one and take Barcelos via 3rd round submission at 11.00 times. And for some extra style points, extra cred in the comments, I'm going to call a mounted guillotine. That's a bit of a outside the box one. Co-main event now. We've got Boza versus Andrei Arlovski. Boza favourite on verdict and the bookies. Verdict 1.39 times and $1.34. Arlovski 3.57 times and $3.18 at the bookies. I won't take long here. I've had some feedback that when I've previously said that, I've gone on to speak for ages. So this time I'll get straight to it. Boza is the real deal. He wins this fight 9 times out of 10 at this stage of his and Arlovski's careers. Andrei can fall into that bracket of fighter from years past. Very one-dimensional boxer, essentially. Incredibly slow. Tries to lull his opponents into his own low-volume affair. Doesn't really do anything in particular to upset his opponent's rhythm. On the other hand, Boza has to be one of the highest pace setters and highest volume guys in the heavyweight division. On the contrary to Andrei, very fast with both his hand speed and his kicks. Thunderous leg kicks, also loves working the body. His movement's elite, so light on his feet, fast with his entries and exits. He actually moves like a welterweight or middleweight, someone about 60, 70 pounds lighter than what he actually is. And then a big comment about that, when he enters and exits the pocket, he's great defensively, circling off away from the power side, reads the next shot to have his hands up, which is important in this fight because Andrei is going to try and crack him with his boxing. It's all he really has when Boza enters range. Andrei is going to be the larger man in there, definitely has the capacity to land a knockout blow, but he hasn't won a fight via finish for 15 straight fights, spanning all the way back to May of 2015. I think this one's pretty simple. Boza's going to be far too quick, too agile for Arlovski to land anything worth noting, while scoring points, landing big shots to the legs, body, head, both inside and outside of range. Tanner has the conditioning to fight like that. He's won a decision victory in the UFC and 6 others on the regional scene, including 3 that went 5 rounds, 25-minute fights. And it's just that. I think Tanner takes this via a decision. The damage could accumulate and we could see Andrei go down. maybe late, but he's actually only been finished once in his last 10 fights, which was a knockout loss to Rosenstrike. So no knock on his durability for an old fella at all. But yeah, Boza via a decision at 7.31 times, a really inviting price given how large of a favourite he is, and I'll be wagering a fair bit of XP on that, I'd imagine. Alright, main event time, Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. Thiago 1.3 times and $1.37 at the bookies, very tightly represented. Glover 4.34 times on verdict and $3.07 at the bookies. Looking at this fight in terms of the lightweight division, probably a title eliminator here. Two guys at the top. They likely get the winner of Blachowicz or Izzy if that fight goes ahead, or fight off for the contender slot against the winner of the Reyes-Prohaska fight. Both of those fights make a lot of sense to me. For Thiago Santos, this is the return 16 months after the John Jones fight. A really close one on the cards in which he blew both of his knees out, requiring surgery to both. What he does well is striking, an incredibly dynamic and powerful kickboxer. One of the most entertaining fighters to watch in the UFC. You know, plenty of heart, can fight on the back foot, explode forwards with long combinations. He does it all on the feet. He reads the stand-up so well. And he always looks for, spinning attacks or knees, anything unorthodox you could possibly imagine. And Glover's very much the opposite, purely a boxer on the feet. And although he is good with his hands and also has, underrated power, he rarely kicks. It's no surprise to anyone that Thiago's going to largely have his way with the striking in this fight. Glover, potentially, he might kick some more in this one in the light of Thiago's recent injuries to both of his knees, but I wouldn't bank on it. I also wanted to talk about the speed. Thiago much, much faster than Glover and will always be first to the punch, which is why Glover's going to need to be the one setting the pace, and his game plan should be that. If you give Thiago space, he's going to light you up from outside range. Very, very simple. Teixeira has to be in his face all fight, walking him down, keeping this at boxing distance to try and take away some of Thiago's kicking game. Of course, it's going to present some of its own dangers, some more problems. Like I've already mentioned, Santos very good fighting on the back foot. He knocked Blachowicz out with a left hand on the rush in, and he's going to look to time Glover with knees, especially when his back foot touches the cage and he's pressured right up. But ultimately, it's going to be the best path for Glover to take, because if he can minimise the damage on the feet, which will be at range, in kickboxing range, get Santos up against the cage, thinking about his hands, the takedowns are going to be on, and then it's entirely Teixeira's realm. He has a monstrous advantage on the ground, and it will be where he wants this fight without a doubt, and he does have the ability to get it there. Very, very solid takedowns, 38% takedown accuracy, which it's okay, but it's kind of the way he strings multiple attempts together relentlessly that accounts for that number, which isn't even that low anyway, 38%. And then when he gets it to the ground, he's so heavy with his top control, so adept at keeping his opponent grounded. But not only that, always looking for transitions, trying to get to more dominant positions and get work off. He has some nasty ground and pound. Look at the Anthony Smith fight. And then also a really strong submission game. Santos does land takedowns of his own, has done it in the past, especially recently, but between him and Glover, it's chalk and cheese, especially when we're talking Santos off his back. Only one career submission to date. Thiago doesn't do much off his back to make his opponent worry. And as for his stand-ups, he uses that kind of explosion technique, large amounts of energy to explode and get up rather than using technique, which has the potential to work a few times in this fight, but it's no way to be getting up to your feet sustainably against someone as dangerous as Teixeira, because he's going to grab something, an arm, a neck, a roll to your back. Santos gave his back up to Eric Anders twice, for God's sake, a guy a quarter the grappler of Glover, less. That was his first fight at 205. Anders took him down 6 times in that fight, Santos ended up winning out of retirement. Eric Anders blew the gas tank. Teixeira won't do that. His conditioning's far, far better. Since that debut at 205, Santos has fought 2 guys who love to strike, essentially, and Jimmy Manuwa and Blachowicz, before John Jones, who decided to stand with him the whole fight anyway. This is 100% going to be his biggest grappling challenge at light heavyweight, for sure. And, if we look to his kind of grappling history at 185, he's choked out by Eric Spicely in the first round. Yikes. Obviously, Thiago Santos is the favourite for a reason here. He's probably going to hurt Glover in this fight, likely early. Glover's made a habit of battling through adversity one way or another throughout his career. And you just have to look recently as well. Cutelaba hurt him early, so did Roberson. Smith was having success in the first round. But like in those fights, I think that Glover can withstand the damage, drag Thiago down, where he seriously isn't much chop. Speaking to Glover's durability as well, only 3 knockout losses on the resume. Gustafsson in 2017 with one of the most ridiculous combinations ever. Anthony Rumble Johnson in 2016, one of the hardest hitters ever. And then he got knocked out in his pro debut dating back to 2002. He's been in there with some amazing strikers, both technical guys, powerful guys, and survived their shots. Rampage, Rashad, OSP, Cannonier, Cutelaba, Roberson, Anthony Smith. He's got a chin at 41, it's fine. People are talking on the age, I don't think it's a factor. And, as a large underdog, and with a factor I would like to talk about, Thiago's return from serious injuries and surgical intervention. And the stylistic advantage I think plays to Glover. I'm going to play him in this spot. I think he gets Thiago down, and I think he taps him out. Glover actually has... trying to label around on this... Glover actually has most of his submission victories in the first round, 6 of his 8, and both of Thiago's submission losses have been in the first. So I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say Teixera first round submission at 12.07 times. Albeit I think the early exchanges favour Santos. I'm struggling to look past that history. Perhaps Santos drops him, chases him to the mat recklessly, or Glover shoots an early takedown and Santos gives up a submission whilst trying to explode to his feet. Either way, I think Glover's a really smart underdog play. Hope I've got the right read, and I can't wait to see it unfold. We won't be much longer just checking on the bets this week. Of course, we're playing a multi, play one every week. Multi per half, and we're going for that 20-1 odds range. Semi-simple this week. I'd like to think it's simple. First leg, we've got Xiaonan straight up. We've got Iain Heinisch straight up. We've got Taha Boza to win in round 3 or decision, speaking to that accumulation of damage on Andrei. But yeah, like I alluded to, or like I pointed out, highlighted, Arlovski's been a durable guy throughout his career. And then the last leg, hopefully we get to this last leg and we'll be sweating on the main a little bit, but we need Teixera to win by any means to close this multi out at $23.98. I think it's a well-placed multi. I think Heinisch's value there. Xiaonan's probably the right price, but I like her in that spot. Boser's going to be far too good, and hopefully he just doesn't sleep Arlovski early. And then Teixera is obviously a risk play. To a few single plays, I'm not playing this one, but I would just like to highlight that the props have come out and Khalid Taha is $9.50 to win by knockout. That's serious value. Like I explained in my breakdown, that is his win condition in my opinion. And if you did like Taha, I could totally endorse that play. I think it's very smart. And I might even end up having something on that, even though I think Barcelos wins because that is far too high. But it won't go towards my single plays record. My 2 single plays that I'm lumping on this weekend is going to be Iain Heinisch at $1.90. I think he should be a slight favourite. I think there's edge in this market. Iain Heinisch opened, well, when I first checked markets a few days ago, he was $2.10, so money's come in on him. I think it will continue to do so. I think he's a good bet. And my next bet, of course, I've got to have a tickle on the main, Teixera at $3.07. I think he is worthy of being an underdog, but with the X factors of Thiago's return and how I feel that this stylistically favours Teixera, he always wants to box him up, get people inside range, which you have to do against Santos. At 41, he's got a level of durability, and yeah, if he gets this to the mat, I think it's game. So $3.07, very handy price. That's everything for this week. I'll probably have a break and not release a video for next week. So I think next time you'll be hearing from me is UFC 255. We've got Figueroa and Perez headlining that one, and the co-main slot Shevchenko versus Maia. So a couple of title fights to treat ourselves to. Aside from that, if you've hung around this long, thank you very much. If you liked my shit talk, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, or drop a comment. Tell me what your picks are, what your bets are. We can have a little chat. either way. All my socials are down in the description as well if you want to follow me on Verdict, Instagram, Twitter. Other than that, catch up.